Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. This last week, we learned that the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner has decided to resign, citing some health challenges. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk about why that's going to be a virtually impossible position to fill. We had this problem about 6 or 7 years ago when the previous commissioner, Mary Dawson, was going to retire, but they had to keep extending her term because they couldn't find anyone to fill it. And eventually, Mario Dion, who is the current commissioner, did put his name forward, and they basically had no choice but to appoint him to the role. And it's been, I would not say a great tenure. He's been a commissioner who seems to operate on a lot of whims and who likes to be very creative in his interpretation of statute. But part of the problem is that when MPs last updated the criteria for this position as part of this big ethics regime, and in the post-Chrétien era, post-sponsorship, when the Conservatives rode into power on the white knight of accountability, that, they wanted to make sure they had this tough ethics regime. But the criteria for the commissioner is virtually impossible to fulfill. And if you look at the Parliament of Canada Act, it says that in order to be appointed to be the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, you need to either be a former judge of a superior court, or it could be a provincial court as well, but superior court is generally where most of the action happens. Or you need to be a former member of a federal or provincial board, commission, or tribunal who, in the opinion of the governor and council, has demonstrated expertise in one or more of the following areas: conflicts of interest, financial arrangements, professional regulation and discipline, or ethics. And they could also be the former Senate ethics officer or former ethics commissioner. But that doesn't give you a whole lot to choose from, especially because this is a role that's going to need to be bilingual as well. It may not say that in the criteria, but that's basically the unspoken rule, especially for a parliamentary officer of parliament like this. And it's going to be really hard to find because the vast majority of former judges are not going to find the position worth the aggravation that they're going to have to put up with, particularly for the pay scale that kind of a position operates at. And, because it's going to be bilingual, that self-selects that narrows down the number of former judges who could fill that role by quite a lot. As for former tribunal chairs, again, that's, you might find a former head of a regulatory body who could, but again, it's going to be a question of who is going to be willing to go through the aggravation of this kind of a role that's going to be very public facing, and that's going to be exposed to a whole lot of criticism, particularly by people who are fans of whichever party is whose MPs are being admonished at the time. So there's not a whole lot of candidates out there to fill the role, and so we're going to see. It's going to be actually even more interesting because Dion is leaving because of these health challenges and not giving the government a whole lot of time in order to find a replacement, and therefore it looks like the position may be vacant, or they may have to find some kind of a interim fix, which is going to be difficult, again, because of those criteria, while they find someone willing to take the role. And if history is any judge to go by, as in when Mary Dawson was going to retire, it took well over a year for them to find someone else who could replace her. And I don't imagine that it's going to be too much more appealing now than it was then. So that's going to be really interesting to see who they're going to be able to find and how soon, because the position is going to be vacant, and it's something that requires a lot of constant particular upkeep in terms of MPs making disclosures and cabinet ministers making disclosures and so on top of the complaints that the office gets. So it's, I don't know what else I can really say at this point. It's just going to be a very tough role to fill for the government. They don't have a lot of time to do that. And this government is slow on appointments for virtually every position, short of Supreme Court justices. So good luck to them, and we'll see how this ends up. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.